Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan and welcome to Words in Time. Now in today's video I'm going to be talking about Gateway by FREDERIK POHL. Now this actually won both the Hugo and the Nebula Awards in 1978, so this is definitely a sci-fi classic. And what is this sci-fi classic all about? Well, the premise for Gateway is that in the future humans have found a hollowed out asteroid, which they refer to as Gateway. And inside it, they have found what was left behind, technology left behind by aliens. Long gone, distant aliens, which are called the Heechee. Now, the humans have figured out how to use some of the technology in the asteroid are starships. And the humans have partially figured out how to work the starships in that they can pick a destination and they can set off. But if they play with any of the other settings, it'll result in disappearance or death. And the Gateway Corporation, which is in control of Gateway, provides rewards, provides money for people that travel out and find new locations and new Heechee artifacts. So prospectors, people known as prospectors, travel to Gateway in order to undertake these dangerous journeys, go on these adventures in order to make their fortune. And our main character, Robinette, who prefers to go by Bob, is one of those prospectors. Now, I want to talk a bit about the structure of the book. It's kind of interesting because the chapters alternate between a present timeline where Robinette, or Bob, is now rather rich and successful after going on missions from Gateway. But that doesn't seem to have made him very happy, so he goes to see a therapist, an artificially intelligent therapist, which he nicknames Siegfried von Schrink, which is kind of funny. Now, the other chapters follow Bob in the past timeline when he is on Gateway. So we follow him as he explores the environment, develops relationships, and goes on these missions. Now, there are also interspersed throughout the book these little notes, reports, and classifieds from Gateway that give you sort of little insights into what's going on, the kind of communications that people on Gateway are sharing. Although, to be honest, I didn't feel like they added a lot to the book. I thought you got some interesting little nuggets here or there, but to be honest, I may have been missing out on something important, but towards the end, I just started kind of skim reading those unless I felt they were directly relevant to the plot. So next I wanted to talk about the pacing in the book, because while this book is not very long, as you can see, as we do our customary flip through on the channel, it's only around 270 pages, so it's not that long, but it's still a bit of a slow burn. To be honest, there isn't that much action in the book. I like the setup, I love the world that POHL creates, but the actual missions aren't super exciting. That's not really the focus of the book. And in the present timeline where we follow the therapy sessions, while I did find those initially interesting at first, Bob is so withholding, those sessions are kind of like pulling teeth. And I understand that might be realistic, that might be quite representative of someone that doesn't really want to talk to their therapist, or maybe they've completely repressed those memories. But even if it's authentic, it doesn't necessarily make for fun reading. Although I will admit it does help build that mystery, build the tension to the question, why is Bob the way he is? So I think the cover actually represents this book really well. I talked about it in my top 10 sci-fi book covers video. Check that out if you haven't seen it. I love this cover because even though it looks like an epic space opera, it's psychedelic, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. As you can see, I'll hold it a bit closer to the camera there. That might help if it focuses. The spirals, the eruption, this rocket that's taking off, it's coming out of the eye of the man. The man is the focus of the book. So, as a character-focused book, I wanted to talk about the main character, Bob. Now, I think how much you enjoy this book will be somewhat influenced by how interesting you find Bob as a character. Now, in the present, he's kind of rich and whiny, and that doesn't make him all that likable, although he can still be quite intriguing and amusing at times. And in the in the past timeline, I wanted to root for Bob because he seems like a bit of an underdog. He needs some luck, he needs some support. He's very anxious and clearly has relationship issues. But unfortunately, I found that hard to do because ultimately, Bob's just not a great guy. This is a bit of a minor spoiler here, but there is a scene in which Bob beats a woman, which is pretty hard to come back from. So I don't need the main character in my books to be a hero, to be a great guy. You know, if we have a flawed character, I want to see that journey to redemption. And if they're beyond redemption, if they're just an evil character, then I want to see them get their comeuppance. Now, unfortunately, the catch in this book, though, is that we know what happens to Bob in the future. So it was a little bit hard for me to get invested in Bob because I no longer really cared about him all that much after that scene. I kind of checked out on Bob as a person, as a character, and I was no longer really emotionally invested in what happened to him. But that was just my reaction. So in terms of the themes, this book, though, is really rich. It is a bit of a shame that I lost interest in Bob because there is quite a lot going on in the book. I think the book does actually a really good job of exploring trauma. There are some pretty heavy things that happen to Bob throughout multiple periods of his life, and how that plays out, how that affects him is explored in quite a deep way in the book. I just wish I cared more about Bob by the time we got to those revelations. There is also an interesting way in which POHL weaves sexuality into the narrative. Now, to be honest, I don't think I would agree with some of the assumptions he maybe put forth or implies about sexuality in the book, but I don't think it came from a negative place. Certainly wouldn't say it's offensive or anything like that. I would say in the 70s when this was written, this was probably quite a forward-thinking approach to the subject. So if that's something that interests you, that is something that this kind of analyze delves into in the book. So something else that I wanted to talk about was the science. So there are a few elements of hard sci-fi in here. We do get some mentions of black holes and relativistic time, and while that's not the focus of the book, I think when POHL does go to those spaces, those areas, those topics, I think he does them really well. So if you're someone that's not so much into hard sci-fi, you don't want too much science in your books, don't worry, I don't think that should put you off. It's not overbearing or overwhelming in here. And if that is something that you like, well, you're not going to get a lot of it, but maybe you'll get just enough, a little bit of a taste in order to scratch that hard sci-fi itch. So overall, what did I think of Gateway? Well, I think the imagination of the world building is fantastic. It's just that the plot didn't quite live up to my excitement for the premise. And I think the character exploration was really well done. Bob is a really deep character. It's just a shame that I didn't have much of an emotional reaction to the emotional high points of the story because I kind of felt alienated by that character after some of his actions. So I can definitely see why this is a classic. I think there are some high points in the book. It just didn't all work for me. So I'm going to give Gateway a 6 out of 10. I think if you're someone that is a plot-first reader or doesn't like some of the subject matter that I mentioned that was in the book, this might not be for you. But if you're not so much looking for a space opera, you're more looking for a deep, dark, psychological journey, and you don't mind some of the things that I mentioned, then this is something pretty unique and it could be the one that you are looking for. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on Gateway by FREDERIK POHL. If you've read the book, get down in the comments and let me know what you thought of it, if you liked it as much as I did or even more. And if you haven't read it, let me know whether it interests you, whether this sounds like your type of sci-fi, whether you'll be picking it up. So I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, I really appreciate you watching. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe because as always, there's more sci-fi content coming soon.